The diplomatic shuttle touched down on the landing platform with a soft hum. Through the small window, Daniel Mercer watched the crystalline towers of Nexus Prime stretch toward the artificial sky. The space station was massive, larger than any human city, built over thousands of years by species who had been traveling between stars when humanity was still learning to make fire. Daniel stood and straightened his simple charcoal suit. He was 53 years old, with gray hair at his temples and deep lines around his eyes. He looked like what he was supposed to be, a tired bureaucrat sent to handle paperwork that nobody important wanted to deal with. That was the point. Behind him, Grace Holloway gathered their documents. She was 28, sharp and eager, fresh from the Diplomatic Academy. This was her first assignment off Earth, and she had been nervous the entire journey. Daniel had spent the trip teaching her the basics of alien etiquette, which forks to use at formal dinners, how to bow to the Valkyrie without showing disrespect. What he had not taught her was what to do if everything went wrong. He hoped she would never need to learn. The shuttle door opened, and the smell of recycled air mixed with something sweet and chemical filled their lungs. A welcoming committee waited on the platform, 2 Valkyrie officials in ceremonial robes, their insect-like bodies clicking and shifting as they moved. Their compound eyes reflected Daniel's image 1,000 times over. Ambassador Mercer, the taller one said through a translator device mounted on its thorax. Welcome to Nexus Prime. The Council has been informed of your arrival. Daniel bowed exactly 15 degrees. As protocol required, thank you for receiving us. Humanity is honored by this opportunity. The Valkyrie made a sound that might have been amusement. Follow us. The council session begins in 1 hour. They walked through corridors of polished stone and glowing panels. Other species passed them, some walking, some floating, some moving in ways that human eyes could barely follow. A group of Drathnor soldiers stood at one intersection, their scaled bodies towering over everyone else. They watched Daniel with obvious contempt, their yellow eyes tracking him like predators watching prey. Grace moved closer to Daniel. They don't seem happy to see us, she whispered. They're not, Daniel replied quietly. The Drathnor lost a border war with us 12 years ago. They still haven't forgotten. Will that be a problem? Daniel considered the question. Probably not today. They continued walking, passing through sections of the station that grew progressively more grand. The council chamber was located at the very heart of Nexus Prime, a symbol of its importance in galactic affairs. For 6,000 years, the great powers of the galaxy had gathered here to make decisions that affected trillions of lives. Wars had been declared in this chamber. Peace treaties had been signed. Species had been elevated to power or condemned to extinction, and now humanity wanted a seat at the table. Daniel had read the briefings. He knew what the other species thought of humans. Young, primitive, aggressive, a species that had achieved faster than light travel only 3 centuries ago and had already fought 4 wars with their neighbors. The fact that humans had won all 4 wars did not improve their reputation. It only made them more frightening to some and more contemptible to others. The Valkyrie considered humanity a temporary nuisance, a species that would either destroy itself or be absorbed into a larger empire within a few generations. The Drathnor saw them as enemies to be crushed whenever the opportunity arose. The other council species had various opinions ranging from mild curiosity to complete indifference. None of them took humanity seriously. That was, Daniel reflected, both a problem and an advantage. They reached a waiting room outside the main chamber. The Valkyrie officials left them there with instructions to wait until called. Grace immediately began reviewing their presentation materials, her fingers dancing over her data tablet. Daniel stood by the window and looked out at the stars. He had been to Nexus Prime once before, 30 years ago. He had not come as a diplomat that time. He had come in darkness, moving through service tunnels and maintenance shafts, carrying equipment that would have started a war if he had been caught. His mission had been to plant listening devices in the Valkyrie High Command's private communication network. He had succeeded, and the intelligence gathered from those devices had prevented 3 separate attacks on human colonies. Nobody knew about that mission. Nobody would ever know. It existed only in files that would be destroyed if anyone tried to access them without proper authorization. Daniel had done many things like that over the years. Things that kept humanity safe. Things that let ordinary people live their lives without knowing how close they had come to disaster. He had killed enemies of Earth in their beds. He had destroyed weapons that could have murdered millions. He had ended threats before they could begin. The intelligence community had given him a code name, the Reaper. He had earned it many times over, but that was the past. 5 years ago, Daniel had retired from active service. He had put away his weapons, and his false identities, and his secrets. He had accepted a position in the Diplomatic Corps, a quiet job that would let him serve humanity in a different way. He had hoped, perhaps foolishly, that he could spend his remaining years building bridges instead of burning them. Grace looked up from her tablet. "Ambassador, they're calling us in." Daniel turned from the window and smiled at her. It was a kind smile, the smile of a patient teacher. "Remember what I told you. Stay calm, speak only when spoken to, and whatever happens, do not show fear." "Do you think something bad will happen?" Grace asked. Daniel thought about the question honestly. The Velkari had been making threatening noises about humanity for decades. The Drathnor were still bitter about their military defeat. Several other species had expressed concern about human expansion into unclaimed territories. The Council had agreed to hear humanity's petition for membership, but that did not mean they would approve it. In fact, the most likely outcome was rejection. The question was whether that rejection would be polite or hostile. "I think," Daniel said carefully, "that we should be prepared for anything." They walked together toward the great doors of the council chamber. 2 guards stood on either side. Massive creatures covered in armor that seemed to grow from their bodies. The doors were 20 meters tall, carved with scenes from galactic history. Daniel took a deep breath. He had faced worse odds before. He had walked into situations where survival seemed impossible, and walked out again. Whatever happened in that chamber, he would handle it. He was a diplomat now. But he had not forgotten how to be something else. The doors swung open, and they stepped into the chamber. The council chamber was the largest enclosed space Daniel had ever seen. It was carved from living rock that seemed to glow with its own inner light. Seats rose in circles around a central platform, climbing higher and higher until they disappeared into shadows far above. Hundreds of delegates filled those seats, representing 47 different species. Some were familiar to Daniel from his years of study. Others were strange and alien in ways that made his human brain struggle to process what he was seeing. At the highest point of the chamber sat High Counselor Vexaran of the Velkari. His ceremonial robes were made of a material that shifted colors constantly, and his compound eyes seemed to take in everything at once. He had led the council for over 200 years, longer than most human nations had existed. Daniel walked to the central platform with Grace following close behind. He could feel the weight of alien eyes on him from every direction. Some of those gazes held curiosity. Most held contempt. A few held something that might have been hunger. He reached the speaking position and bowed to the chamber. "High Counselor, distinguished delegates, I am Ambassador Daniel Mercer, of the United Earth Government. I come before you today with a formal petition for humanity's admission to full membership in the Galactic Council." A murmur passed through the chamber. Daniel had expected that. Humanity had been an associate member for 50 years, allowed to trade and travel, but not to vote or participate in council decisions. The request for full membership was bold, perhaps too bold for such a young species. Daniel continued with his prepared speech. He spoke of humanity's contributions to galactic security. The ships they had provided to patrol dangerous border regions, the technology they had shared with developing worlds. He mentioned the trade agreements that had benefited dozens of species, the cultural exchanges that had built friendships across vast distances of space. He spoke for 15 minutes, laying out humanity's case with careful logic and respectful language. When he finished, he bowed again and waited for the council's response. High Counselor Vexaran did not respond immediately. He sat in his elevated seat, his mandibles clicking softly as he considered the petition. The chamber waited in silence. Then Vexaran stood and began to descend from his platform. He moved with the fluid grace of his species, his multiple limbs carrying him down stairs that had been built for many different body types. The clicking of his feet on stone echoed through the silent chamber. Daniel watched him approach without moving. Something felt wrong. The High Counselor should have responded from his seat, as protocol required. This descent was unusual and unexpected. Vexaran stopped directly in front of Daniel, close enough that Daniel could see his own reflection in those compound eyes. The alien was taller than him by nearly a meter, and his presence seemed to fill the space around them. "You speak of contributions," Vexaran said. His translator made his voice sound flat and cold. "But tell me, human ambassador, what has your species truly offered to this council? What have you given that we could not have taken for ourselves?" Daniel kept his voice steady. "We have offered partnership and cooperation, High Counselor. We have worked alongside other species in good faith." Good faith. Vexaran made a sound that might have been laughter. "Your species has been in space for 300 years. In that time, you have fought 4 wars. You have expanded into territories that other species had claimed. You have developed weapons that threaten the stability of entire regions. We fought those wars in defense of our people and our allies," Daniel replied. "We have never been the aggressor. That is a matter of perspective." Vexaran leaned closer, his mandibles inches from Daniel's face. "From my perspective, humanity is a disease that spreads wherever it goes. You multiply without control. You consume resources without thought for the future. You destroy anything that threatens your dominance." The chamber had gone completely silent. Daniel could hear his own heartbeat in his ears. "We are what our circumstances have made us," he said quietly. "We evolved on a world that tried to kill us every day. We survived because we learned to adapt, to fight, to never give up. Those same qualities that you call aggressive have also made us loyal friends and valuable partners." Vexaran's compound eyes glittered. "Friends? Partners? Do you truly believe that any species in this chamber sees humanity as anything other than a threat to be contained?" He gestured at the watching delegates. "The Drathnor remember the war you fought against them. The Netherians remember the colonies you destroyed during the Rim conflict. The Kroth remember how you stole their mining technology and used it to undercut their economy." Daniel felt Grace shift nervously behind him. He kept his attention on Vexaran. Those conflicts were complicated. Both sides made mistakes. We have tried to make amends where possible. Amends. Vexaran's voice dripped with contempt. You cannot make amends for what you are, human. You are children playing at civilization. You were living in mud huts and fighting with sharp sticks when my species was charting the far reaches of the galaxy. He raised one of his forward limbs, the sharp tip gleaming in the chamber's light. This is what we think of your petition. The blow came faster than Daniel could react. The limb struck him across the face, hard enough to snap his head to the side and split his lip open. Blood sprayed across the polished floor. Daniel staggered but managed to stay on his feet. Grace cried out and started forward. Daniel held up his hand to stop her without looking away from Vexaran. The chamber erupted in sound. Some delegates were making noises of shock. Others were laughing. The Drathnor representative was pounding his fists on his seat in obvious approval. Blood ran down Daniel's chin and dripped onto his suit. He did not wipe it away. He stood perfectly still. His eyes locked on Vexaran's face. "Return to your primitive world," the High Counselor said. "The Council has no place for vermin. Be grateful that we are allowing you to leave with your lives." Daniel tasted copper in his mouth. His lip was swelling, and he could feel the bruise forming on his cheek. But beneath the pain, something else was stirring, something cold and patient that he had buried 5 years ago. "Is that the official response of the Council?" he asked. His voice was calm, almost pleasant. "It is," Vexaran replied. "Now leave. Before we decide to make a more permanent example of you." Daniel nodded slowly. He reached up and touched his split lip, looking at the blood on his fingers as if it were something curious and unexpected. Then he smiled. It was not the kind smile he had shown Grace earlier. It was not the diplomatic smile he had worn throughout his presentation. This was something else entirely, something that made Vexaran take an involuntary step backward. "I had hoped," Daniel said softly, "that we could do this the civilized way." The temperature in the chamber seemed to drop. "But if this is how you want it," Daniel continued, still smiling that terrible smile, "then let me show you what humanity really is." The first guard died before anyone understood what was happening. He was standing at the main entrance, 15 meters from the central platform, holding a weapon that could have cut through armor plating. One moment he was there. The next moment Daniel was behind him, and the guard was falling to the floor with his neck bent at an angle that no living creature could survive. The chamber exploded into chaos. Delegates screamed and scrambled for exits. Guards rushed forward from every direction, drawing weapons and shouting commands in a dozen different languages. Vexaran stumbled backward, his compound eyes wide with something that might have been fear. 2 more guards opened fire at Daniel with plasma rifles. The bright bolts of energy tore through the air where he had been standing a fraction of a second earlier. But Daniel was no longer there. He moved through the chamber like a ghost, faster than any human should have been able to move, his body bending and twisting around attacks that should have killed him instantly. He reached the second guard and struck him once in the throat. The guard collapsed, gasping for air through a crushed windpipe. The third guard tried to bring his weapon around, but Daniel grabbed his arm, twisted it, and used the guard's own momentum to throw him into a fourth attacker. Both of them went down in a tangle of limbs and armor. 4 guards down in less than 5 seconds. Grace stood frozen on the central platform, her data tablet forgotten in her hands. She had been trained for diplomatic incidents. She had been prepared for hostile negotiations and difficult conversations. She had not been prepared to watch her ambassador turn into something out of a nightmare. More guards poured into the chamber. 10, 20, 30 of them, representing half a dozen different species. They formed a circle around Daniel, weapons raised and ready. The delegates who had not managed to escape pressed themselves against the walls, watching in horrified silence. Daniel stood in the center of the circle, breathing steadily. His suit was torn in several places, and blood from his split lip had stained his collar. But his hands were steady, and his eyes were calm. "Stay where you are," the lead guard commanded. He was a Drathnor, nearly 3 meters tall, covered in scales and muscle. "Move again, and we will kill you." Daniel looked at him with something like pity. "No," he said simply. "You won't. You are surrounded. There is no escape." "I am not trying to escape." Daniel turned slowly, looking at each of the guards in turn. "I am making a point." Vexaran had retreated to the base of his elevated platform, surrounded by his own personal guards. His mandibles were clicking rapidly, a sign of extreme agitation. "Kill him," he ordered. "Kill him now." The guards hesitated. Daniel had taken down 4 of their best fighters in seconds. None of them wanted to be next. Daniel used their hesitation to speak. His voice carried through the silent chamber, reaching every corner of the vast space. "My name is Daniel Mercer. I came here today as a diplomat, representing the United Earth government. I offered peace and partnership and a chance to build something together." He paused, letting the words sink in. "Your response was violence and contempt. You struck me across the face like I was nothing more than an animal." He reached up and wiped the blood from his chin, looking at it thoughtfully. "So let me introduce myself properly. Not as a diplomat, but as what I was before. What I still am." Underneath the suits and the speeches and the careful words, the guards shifted nervously. Something in Daniel's voice had changed. It was colder now. Harder. Like steel wrapped in silk. "Your intelligence services have a file on me. They have been trying to identify me for 30 years. They call me by a code name, a name whispered in dark rooms and classified briefings." Daniel smiled that terrible smile again. "They call me the Reaper. .com. The effect was immediate. Several of the guards took involuntary steps backward. The Drathnor commander's yellow eyes went wide with recognition, and something that looked very much like fear. You are lying, Vexaran said, but his voice lacked conviction. Am I? Daniel turned to face him. 32 years ago, the Valkyrie High Command planned an invasion of the Rim territories. They had gathered their fleet in secret. They had prepared their ground forces. They were 3 days away from launching an attack that would have killed millions of humans. He took a step toward Vexaran. The guards tensed, but did not fire. One night, every member of that command council died in their sleep. No wounds, no signs of struggle, no evidence of how it happened. The invasion was cancelled. The fleet dispersed, and nobody ever found out who was responsible. Another step. Vexaran pressed himself against his platform. That was me. Daniel's voice was soft now, almost gentle, but it carried the weight of death. 24 years ago, the Drathnor were developing a biological weapon designed to target human genetics. Their research facility was hidden in an asteroid field, protected by defenses that should have been impossible to penetrate. He glanced at the Drathnor commander. One morning, that facility was gone. Vaporized. Along with everyone inside it, and every piece of research they had developed, the official explanation was an accident, a reactor malfunction. The commander's scales had gone pale. That was also me. Daniel stopped walking. He stood in the center of the chamber, surrounded by enemies, completely at ease. I have killed more enemies of humanity than I can count. I have ended threats that you never even knew existed. I have walked into places that were supposed to be impossible to enter, and done things that were supposed to be impossible to do. He spread his arms wide, offering himself as a target. And I did it all so that ordinary humans could live their lives in peace, so that children could grow up without fear, so that my species could have a future. Timer, Ars, XP. The chamber was absolutely silent. Even the guards seemed afraid to breathe. I retired 5 years ago. Daniel continued. I put away my weapons and my secrets. I became a diplomat because I believed that there had to be a better way. I believed that maybe, just maybe, we could build bridges instead of burning them. His eyes found Vexaran. But you reminded me of something today, High Counselor. You reminded me of what I really am. What humanity really is. He smiled, and this time there was something almost sad in it. We are survivors. We are fighters. We are the species that refuse to die, no matter how many times the universe tried to kill us. His voice hardened. And when you strike us, we strike back. Grace finally found her voice. Daniel, she whispered. What are you doing? He did not look at her. His eyes remained fixed on Vexaran. I am showing them the truth, he said. I am showing them what they are really dealing with. The silence in the chamber stretched on like a held breath. 40 weapons remained pointed at Daniel, but nobody fired. The guards looked at each other, uncertainty written on their faces. They had all heard the stories about the Reaper. They had all dismissed those stories as exaggeration, as myth, as propaganda designed to make humanity seem more dangerous than it really was. Now they were not so sure. Daniel stood perfectly still, his arms at his sides, watching Vexaran, with eyes that held no mercy and no fear. The High Counselor had not moved from his position against the platform. His mandibles had stopped clicking. For perhaps the first time in his 200-year reign, he seemed genuinely afraid. I could kill everyone in this chamber, Daniel said. His voice was conversational, almost friendly, as if he were discussing the weather. Every delegate, every guard, every aide and assistant and observer. 47 species represented here. The political leadership of half the galaxy. He paused, letting the words sink in. It would take perhaps 10 minutes. Maybe less. Your security systems would not be able to stop me. Your weapons would not be fast enough to catch me. By the time reinforcements arrived, there would be nothing left but bodies. A tremor ran through the chamber. Several delegates who had been pressed against the walls tried to push further back, as if they could somehow escape through solid stone. But I am not going to do that, Daniel continued. Do you know why? Nobody answered. Nobody dared. Daniel's expression softened slightly. The terrible smile faded, replaced by something more complex. Sadness, perhaps. Or disappointment, because humanity does not want war. We have never wanted war. Every conflict we have fought, every battle we have won, every enemy we have destroyed, all of it was in response to aggression against us. We did not start those wars. We ended them. He began to walk slowly around the central platform, his footsteps echoing in the silence. The guards tracked him with their weapons, but made no move to stop him. You call us aggressive. You call us dangerous. You point to our military victories and our expanding borders and you say, "Look how violent these humans are. Look how they threaten the stability of the galaxy." Daniel shook his head. But you never ask why we fight. You never ask what drove us to develop the weapons and the soldiers and the strategies that have made us so effective. Number. He stopped and looked up at the assembled delegates, meeting their eyes one by one. We fight because we had no choice. We fight because every time we reached out in peace, someone tried to destroy us. The Drathnor attacked our colonies without warning. The Velkari plotted to invade our territory. A dozen other species decided that humanity was weak, that we were easy prey, that they could take what we had built without consequence. His voice grew harder. They were wrong. Every single one of them was wrong. And the ones who survived learned a valuable lesson about underestimating humans. Daniel turned back to Vexaran. The High Counselor had finally managed to compose himself somewhat, though his compound eyes still held traces of fear. "Let me tell you something about my species, High Counselor. Something your intelligence analysts have never understood, despite 30 years of trying." He took a step closer. "We evolved on a death world. Earth is one of the most hostile environments in the known galaxy for intelligent life. Our planet is covered in predators that want to eat us, diseases that want to kill us, natural disasters that want to destroy everything we build. The very ground shakes beneath our feet. The oceans rise up and drown our cities. The sky rains fire during meteor showers. Another step, we should have died out millions of years ago. Every other species that evolved on Earth went extinct. The dinosaurs ruled for 100 million years, and then they were gone. But humans survived. Do you know how?" Vexaran said nothing. "We survived because we are the most adaptable creatures in existence. When the environment changed, we changed with it. When predators hunted us, we hunted them back. When disease struck our communities, we learned to heal ourselves. When natural disasters destroyed our homes, we built new ones." Daniel's voice dropped to almost a whisper, but it carried through every corner of the chamber. "And when we finally reached the stars and found that the galaxy was just as hostile as our homeworld, we adapted again. We created weapons that could destroy fleets. We developed strategies that could win wars against superior numbers. We trained soldiers who could do impossible things." He gestured at himself. "We created people like me, humans who were willing to sacrifice everything: our comfort, our innocence, our souls, so that the rest of our species could remain good and kind and hopeful. We became monsters, so that our children would not have to be." The weight of those words hung in the air. "I have killed many beings in my life," Daniel said quietly. "Some of them deserved it. Some of them were simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. I do not enjoy killing. I never have. But I did what was necessary to protect my people, and I would do it again without hesitation." He looked around the chamber at the watching delegates. "That is what humanity is. We are not mindless aggressors. We are not violent for the sake of violence. We are survivors, doing whatever it takes to ensure that our species has a future." His voice softened. "But we are also more than that. We are artists and scientists and philosophers. We create beauty and wonder and joy. We love our families and our friends with a depth that I suspect many of you cannot understand." Daniel turned back to Vexaran. "We came here today offering partnership. We came offering our strength and our creativity and our stubborn refusal to give up. We wanted to build something together with the rest of the galaxy, not because we are afraid of you, but because we believe that cooperation is better than conflict." He shook his head slowly. "And you struck me across the face. You called us vermin. You proved that you see us as nothing more than animals to be controlled or destroyed." The disappointment in his voice was genuine and deep. "I had hoped for better. I had hoped that after all these years, after all the wars and conflicts and misunderstandings, we might finally be able to find common ground. I had hoped that you might see us as potential allies rather than potential threats." He sighed. "I see now that I was wrong. You are not ready to accept humanity as equals. Perhaps you never will be." Grace stepped forward from her position on the platform. Her voice trembled, but she spoke clearly. "Daniel, what happens now?" He looked at her, and for a moment the cold warrior disappeared, replaced by the tired diplomat she had known before. "That depends on them," he said, nodding toward Vexaran. "That depends on what they choose to do with what they have learned today." The chamber waited in breathless silence. Daniel reached slowly into his jacket. Every guard in the chamber tensed, weapons humming with deadly energy. Fingers tightened on triggers. The Drathnor commander took a step forward, ready to give the order to fire. Daniel pulled out a data tablet, the same one that Grace had been carrying when they entered the chamber. He held it up so everyone could see it clearly. "This contains humanity's petition for full council membership," he said. "The same petition I presented before the High Counselor decided to strike me. It outlines our qualifications, our contributions, our hopes for the future." He walked toward Vexaran, moving slowly and deliberately. The guards shifted but did not fire. Something in Daniel's manner told them that he was not attacking, not yet. Anyway, he stopped in front of the High Counselor and held out the tablet. "You have a choice now," Daniel said. "The same choice every species has when they encounter humanity." Vexaran stared at the tablet as if it were a poisonous creature that might bite him. "You can reject this petition again," Daniel continued. "You can have your guards execute me, right here, right now. You can declare humanity an enemy of the Galactic Council and wage war against us." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper that only Vexaran could hear. "And I promise you, you will lose that war. Not today. Not tomorrow. Maybe not for 100 years. But eventually, you will lose. Because we do not stop. We do not give up. We do not forget. We will fight and die and sacrifice everything we have. And in the end, we will still be standing when your empire is nothing but dust and memory." Vexaran's mandibles clicked nervously. Daniel stepped back and raised his voice so the entire chamber could hear. "Or you can make a different choice. You can accept our petition. You can welcome humanity as partners instead of enemies. You can benefit from our technology, our creativity, our determination." He smiled, and this time, there was genuine warmth in it. "We make excellent friends. You know, we are loyal to those who treat us with respect. We protect those we care about with everything we have. We remember kindness as well as we remember cruelty." He set the tablet down at Vexaran's feet. "We do not want to conquer the galaxy. We do not want to rule over other species. We simply want a place at the table. We want to be heard, to be respected, to be given the same opportunities as everyone else." Daniel looked around the chamber at the watching delegates. 50 years ago, humanity applied for associate membership in this council. We were granted limited rights, limited access, limited respect. We accepted those limitations because we understood that we were new to the galactic community. We understood that trust had to be earned. He turned back to Vexaran. "We have spent 50 years trying to earn that trust. We have protected your borders, supported your economies, shared our discoveries. We have done everything asked of us and more, and still you treat us like criminals begging for scraps." His voice hardened. "That ends today. One way or another, things will be different from this moment forward. Either we will be your partners, working together to build a better future for all species, or we will be your enemies, and you will discover what humanity is capable of when we truly have nothing to lose." The silence that followed was absolute. Vexaran looked at the tablet at his feet. Then he looked at Daniel, at the blood still drying on the human's chin, at the calm certainty in those alien eyes. The High Counselor had ruled for 200 years. He had faced threats and challenges from every corner of the galaxy. He had survived assassination attempts, political coups, and interstellar wars. He was not easily frightened, but he was frightened now, because he was looking at something he had never seen before, a species that was completely unafraid, a species that would rather die than submit, a species that had produced individuals like the one standing before him, ordinary-looking creatures who could destroy armies and topple empires. And he realized, with a clarity that cut through 200 years of certainty, that everything he had believed about humanity was wrong. They were not children playing at civilization. They were survivors of the most brutal evolutionary process in the galaxy. They had earned their place among the stars through blood and sacrifice, and sheer stubborn refusal to die, and they were offering him a choice. Slowly, carefully, Vexaran bent down and picked up the data tablet. He held it in his forward limbs, feeling its weight, considering what it represented. "The council will require time to deliberate," he said. His voice was different now, stripped of contempt and arrogance. "This is not a decision that can be made quickly." Daniel nodded. "We understand. We have waited 50 years. We can wait a little longer. But I will say this." Vexaran looked up at the watching delegates. "What happened here today will not be forgotten. The council will consider humanity's petition with fresh perspective. It was not acceptance. But it was not rejection either." Daniel bowed. "That is all we ask, High Counselor. A fair hearing, an honest evaluation, a chance to prove what we can contribute to the galactic community." He turned to Grace, who was still standing on the central platform, looking like she had witnessed something beyond her understanding. "Come," he said gently. "Our work here is done, for now." They walked toward the chamber doors. The guards parted before them, no longer pointing their weapons. The delegates watched in silence as the two humans passed. At the doorway, Daniel paused and looked back at Vexaran. "One more thing, High Counselor. I meant what I said about humanity making excellent friends. We protect those we care about. We stand by our allies through any hardship." He smiled. "Choose wisely. The galaxy is changing. New threats are emerging in the darkness between stars. When those threats arrive, you will want humanity standing beside you, not against you." He walked through the doors and was gone. Grace caught up to him in the corridor outside. Her hands were shaking. "What was that?" she demanded. "What did you do in there?" Daniel looked at her with tired eyes. "I showed them the truth. I showed them what humanity really is, the good and the bad, the light and the dark. Now it is up to them to decide how to respond. But you killed those guards. You threatened to kill everyone. How is that diplomacy?" Daniel smiled sadly. "Sometimes, diplomacy requires more than words. Sometimes, you have to show people what the alternative looks like before they will choose peace." He put a hand on her shoulder. "I did not want it to happen this way. I hoped we could resolve everything through civilized negotiation. But they forced my hand when they struck me. When they showed their contempt for everything we are." He started walking toward the shuttle bay. "Now they know the truth. Now they understand that humanity is not to be dismissed or ignored or attacked without consequence. And now, for the first time in 50 years, they will actually consider our petition on its merits." Grace followed him in silence, her mind struggling to process everything she had witnessed. Behind them, in the council chamber, Vexaran stood holding the data tablet. Around him, delegates whispered to each other. Their certainties shattered. Their assumptions destroyed. The galaxy would never look at humanity the same way again. And perhaps, Daniel thought as he boarded the shuttle, that was exactly what they had needed all along. Not to be feared, not to be hated, but to be understood, to be seen as they truly were, survivors, fighters, dreamers, builders, human,